Welcome to Console Room and our next panel.
How about now? All right, everybody, it is the 10th anniversary of Console Room, and it is also the 89th birthday of Tom Baker. Those are two very important things. Now, way back in 1992, when I was 17, I was in this band, and I played guitar and I sang, and I did them both really, really badly, but the other people in the band were really good. They covered up for me, and we had convinced the people at First Avenue to let us open up their annual Minnesota band showcase. We were the opening act on the main stage. And I remember thinking this was a huge deal for us. Like Soul Asylum had headlined this years before, and the Replacements got their start there. It was pretty much Prince's club. And so we get up there and we start playing, and we look down, and there were 4 of us up on stage playing our hearts out, and there's one guy in the audience just like this. And I thought maybe, 3:20 on a Friday afternoon of the convention is probably only going to be one guy in the audience doing that. But as it turns out, there are 2 people in the audience. So the audience outnumbers the panelists. This is us, 3 people. And we're probably going to get more trickling in. So I'm stalling for time as people trickle in. By the way, my name is Rob Callahan. I've written a handful of books, and I did some music and arts journalism for a while for some local papers that have all gone out of business. And now what I also do is I farm. So I've got a 1/4 acre in the city, half of which is covered by my house and garage. So the other 1/8 acre or so is what I use for growing food for the family. And then I've got an 1.5 acres up north that we use for acorns and maple sap and some berries. And then I've got an actual farm down in northern Iowa that my sister and I run together. So that's where I sort of get my plants expertise. And today, this panel, I don't know if we can call it a panel, it's just me. This presentation is real-life Krynoids, from carnivorous plants to zombie spores to sentient forests. How do some of the doctor's photosynthetic baddies compare to our real-world plant life? And it's a panel on Earth's most animal-like vegetation, and a look at some of Doctor Who's best plant monsters, or chlorophenes, as they might be called. So, does everyone know what a Krynoid is, or was, in the show? All right, I think I'll just recap them briefly. It was The Seeds of Doom. It was a Tom Baker and Sarah Jane episode. And the Krynoids were the dominant species on their planet. They were plants who had taken over everything, and they would shoot seed pods off into space in pairs. And wherever they would land, they would try to establish themselves and take over as the dominant life form on that planet too. So in the Antarctic, in a scientific research base, some scientists unearth the pods. One of them gets infected. And it's kind of a body horror story, because the idea is that this guy is turning into a Krynoid, which will then go on to infect the entire rest of the planet. But they defeat the first guy. The second pod opens up and infects another guy, and then they clearly state he's not turning into the Krynoid. The Krynoid is feeding on him as it grows. And so that's not quite the body horror thing, because like in like Ark in space, when he was turning into a Wirren, you knew it was still him inside. And with the Krynoid, it was something else. You were slowly feeding this thing that was taking your place. And that was, I thought, a particularly scary and dark storyline to have in a family show. But it was during that era when there were a lot of like really dark and scary stories, like Planet of Evil, and Genesis of the Daleks was pretty dark, So for this presentation, we're just really just going to recap some of the chlorophenes that we've seen in Doctor Who, and also compare them to some of the real-world animal-like plants and fungi that are out there. So, in addition to the Krynoids, there were the vervoids. Anyone remember the vervoids? It was a Colin Baker serial during Trial of the Time Lord, And the vervoids were plants that were genetically engineered to be a slave race, to do all the manual labor for humans in space. And the plants rebelled and started killing the humans, and then they became the bad guys. Although, honestly, if I was bred to be a slave race, I'd probably rebel too. So my sympathies were kind of with the plants on that one. They maybe just went a little overboard on being so murdery, I don't know. The forest of Cheam is a new Who concept. We only saw them once in a 10th Doctor episode, and they were trees that had evolved to become sentient. They had arms and legs, and one of them gave the Doctor a gift of a clipping from her, I think, great-great-grandfather. In return, the Doctor breathed on her and gave her the gift of air from his lungs, which she said was very intimate. And then there's also the vegetation of Skaro, the Daleks' home planet. Way back in the 60s, we saw the Varga plant. This is a plant that was actually able to move around, and it did a lot of the same things that the Krynoids did. It would infect you with its spores, which would slowly turn you into another Varga plant. And then in John Pertwee's era, we revisited Skaro in the episode The Planet of the Daleks, which was like a direct sequel to the very first Dalek episode. And you saw there was a lot more vegetation out there. There was these plants that had eyes that moved around, and if they saw you, they would squirt stuff at you that would slowly grow on you and eat you and take you over. And there were plants that would encase the TARDIS in sap that would harden so you couldn't get out once they'd done that. And I think that's all I can think of for the plant life in Doctor Who that was either sentient or acted like an animal in some way. Did I missed anything? Does anyone know of another one that I've missed? All right, so let's talk about the Krynoids, because they're like the scariest ones to me. And they actually mirror a lot of different plants here on Earth. The one that I think probably everyone knows is the Venus flytrap, and it has modified leaves that close around the insects to capture its prey. When the insect walks in, there are these fine little fibers, little hairs on the inside of the mouth, the closing mechanism. And when those get tripped, the mouth closes, trapping the insect inside, where it is slowly digested, kind of like being in the Sarlacc pit, although much quicker. So that's one of the most well-known ones. There's also the pitcher plants. Now, they have modified leaves that form like a pitcher, a deep cavity, and they have lids on top usually too. And the plants will go in there because they produce a nectar that smells sweet and delicious, and the insects will go in to feed on that, slip down the sides, and get stuck in the bottom in a... Some of them eat off the feces of animals as well. Yes, yes. So is that pitcher plants? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So we've got pitcher plants that eat off the feces of animals and actually devour live animals as well in a shallow pool of digestive fluids at the bottom of the plant, which is scary. And some have even developed a unique ability to vibrate their lid in case there is an insect clinging to the bottom of the lid, like in a rainstorm. They go in there for shelter from the rain, and when raindrops hit the plant, the lid starts to vibrate and knock them down into the pool of digestive fluids, which is, it's a pretty specific adaptation, but maybe not the most specific one we're going to hear about. There's also the sundew plants, and they have modified leaves that are covered in glandular hairs, similar to those inside of the Venus flytrap, and they're sticky. So a plant walks along the leaf and just gets stuck and then slowly digested that way. Other plants that have ways of interacting with the world around them that are kind of animal-like are the sensitive plant. This plant has leaves that just fold up and droop whenever you touch it. We believe that this is a defense against herbivores. You go up to nibble on the leaf and it droops and it looks like it's spoiled and rotted, so you move on to something else. The striking corpse lily. They had one of these at the Como Zoo. I think they still have it there, but it only opens every 10 years or so. And it grows on a different plant, a different host plant. It doesn't have any leaves or stems or roots. And yeah, and when it blooms, It emits the smell of rotting flesh, which attracts flies and beetles and other things that eat rotting flesh in order to get them to take its pollen and transfer the pollen around. Some orchids have actually evolved to mimic the scent, shape, and color of female insects to attract male insects for pollination as well. So those are a few examples of the many plants that have been observed to exhibit animal-like traits. It's kind of scary to think about what these plants would do if they had the abilities to move around or to get big enough. I think when we were all young and they used to show the old like black and white Tarzan serials on Saturday morning TV, you'd always see him fighting man-eating plants. Those were all based on this kind of thing. So that's that. And as far as the Krynoids go, I think that they really they embody a lot of the characteristics we see in our real-life plants. I should also say that I didn't realize this was a one-person presentation. I thought that this was a panel, but I'm fine being up here. So I'm not just the panelist, I'm the moderator. So at any time, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question or add something, feel free, go ahead, because I'll cut myself off and call on you. I can cut the panelist off as the moderator. That's my job. All right, so take some coffee here. We're online, by the way. We are the first streaming presentation of the convention. So a lot of firsts. We're not the first panel of the afternoon, but we are the first. I don't even know what we're the first of, but we're the first streaming, and we're opening for Sophie Aldred, who'll be up here after me. So much like back in 1992, opening for much greater acts, I get to do that again, open for Ace. So we're looking forward to that interview. And in addition to the Krynoids, there were the vervoids, a slave race of plants who were bred to do all the manual labor for the humans, and they rebelled. Now, there aren't a lot of comparisons to real-world plants we can draw there. Plants that were engineered and bred and cultivated to do a specific task for humans, and then decided to stop doing it. Except, and hear me out on this, peanuts. We've been cultivating them as food for decades and centuries, and 40 or 50 years ago, a peanut allergy was a pretty rare thing, and now they're very common. I think the peanuts don't want to be eaten anymore, and they're evolving to rebel against us. Now that, of course, was a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's the sort of thing that we see as both natural and artificial selection change the makeup of the plant life and the animal life around us, and it's fun to joke about. I don't know of any scientific research that would back that up, but a future Doctor Who episode could be Attack of the Peanut Monsters. Who knows? Let's talk about the sentient forests a bit, because I think these are really interesting. This concept is really interesting. The concept is known as interspecific communication, and it occurs through the exchange of chemical signals and the sharing of resources via a network of underground fungi. And they connect the roots of different trees. And studies have shown that this communication allows trees to not only share resources and information, but also to coordinate their defenses against pests and disease. Some research has even shown that adult trees will share nutrients with the saplings, their own children, if they need it more. The underground communication between trees through their roots was first proposed in the 1990s and the 2000s by an ecologist named Suzanne Simard, and she conducted research on the Douglas fir forest in British Columbia. And over the years, a lot of people have tried to debunk her work. And they have actually been able to point to some flaws in her research. For one, there wasn't really a good control versus variable set in her experiments. So there was the possibility of bias and some sort of simple interpretations of her work end up with people saying things like the trees talk to each other through their roots, which is so simplified it's ridiculous. And you see a lot of things like op-eds and stuff criticizing that idea and saying it's stupid. We don't want that taught in our science classes. Trees don't talk to each other through their roots. But that's just the op-eds of like the New York Times and stuff. Reputable papers, but their op-eds could still go wherever they want to go. The actual scientific research that has attempted to reproduce her findings has actually been able to reproduce the findings. So it's pretty much agreed upon that until we figure out something to disprove this, this is actually what is happening. Trees are communicating and interacting with each other through the soil. Now, that's not to say that you're going to find the plants in your garden doing the same thing. If you're gardening, or even if you've got like a big conventional farm, you're tilling that soil every spring before you put stuff in it. You're destroying the ecology that's in there that facilitates this sort of communication. So your plants, they're going to have whatever the plant equivalent of loneliness is, even if they're surrounded by other plants of the same kind. But in these older established forests, and especially in old growth where there's still old growth forests, this is something that happens, and it's mind-blowing to think about it. These things that we've only ever thought of as sources of fiber and as food, turns out that they have a form of interaction which can be equivocated to sentience, to actual thought and interaction. So on a side note, so I am my genetic makeup would be Irish, Scandinavian, German, and Ho-Chunk, which is Native American. And our beliefs on my mother's side, on the Ho-Chunk side, the beliefs go way back about trees being living things with thoughts and feelings and central nervous systems and things like that. So this more modern research into this concept really kind of backs up some of this old knowledge, which I personally like. The Ho-Chunks were some of the first and most successful farmers in the original Americas. At the time of contact with European explorers, we had a capital city, which is now Green Bay, Wisconsin. We had villages and towns scattered around. We had trade routes that went everywhere. And most of the nations did have trade routes that intersected. That's how you'd find like turquoise and copper from way down in Mexico all the way up, in Canada and back and forth. We had cornfields that were the length of 5 football fields that was nothing but corn. Very successful farmers and very successful botanists, I guess you would say, herbiculturalists, agriculturalists. So that's another, I guess, reason why I have this instinct to be to work with plants and to be farming and gardening. It goes way back in my blood on 3 of the 4 sides that I know of. I don't know what the Irish were doing, starving on potatoes probably. My great-great-grandfather was sent over here on a boat as a little kid, and back then the Irish were notorious for just packing their kids on a boat and sending them to New York because it was better than starving to death in Ireland. Even though there was no one waiting for them there, they ended up becoming street kids. It was a higher likelihood of survival than it was to stay there. So that's how that part of my family got here. Potatoes, by the way, are an interesting thing, and I'm going to talk more about them in the hydroponics workshop later. Potatoes don't need a lot of nutrients from the soil. They get almost all of their food by photosynthesis and then storing the carbs in the actual spuds that grow underground. So that's why they can grow in so many different environments. They don't really care what the soil is like. It just can't be too damp because that rots the spud. All right, back to the sentient plants things. So I haven't talked about fungi yet, and I should, because they are also very much like the Krynoids in that they tend to take you over and use you as they feed on you. Not all fungi, of course, but some. And they're not technically plants, but they're not technically animals either, and they act more like plants, so we're going to go with them under the plants category. Before I go on, anything I've missed, any questions I should field? All right. I hope, I don't know how many people are watching at home, but I hope you're having a good time. Yes, go ahead. Yes, the Vashta, and I'm kicking myself for not having thought of them. They were, just for anyone who couldn't hear, they were a fungus that had a symbiotic relationship with the trees on the particular planet they were from. And they ended up, they didn't like humans. They didn't like animal life very well. And they ended up in this vast library because those trees had been taken and chopped down and ground up into pulp to make the pages of all these books in the library. There are a lot of symbiotic plants and symbiotic fungi out there too. I think I had notes on, I didn't put any notes down on the symbiotic fungi, but they are out there. And there are things like, there's one that feeds a particular beetle, and the beetle eats it, and then in its dung, the spores come out and spread that way. So the beetle, as it moves around, can spread the fungus colony. Much like some of the bigger plants like the fruit trees and fruiting vegetables have evolved to spread their seeds the same way with humans and other mammals who go and eat the fruit. Some of the fruit even needs to be put through a digestive system before it is stratified and ready to produce a viable organism once it hits the ground. Yes, question.
We have a request and a reminder from our YouTube audience. Could you repeat the question that was asked? Or if the audience is willing to, we have a mic in the center of the room.
All right. So we've got a YouTube audience. All right. So yeah, that question it wasn't a question. It was just basically, hey, Rob, you forgot one, the Vashta from, what was the title of the episode? Silence in the Library? Yep, Silence in the Library. The first River Song episode, too, I think. Okay. So let's talk about the mutant ant fungus, because this it behaves very similarly to the Krynoids. And it infects carpenter ants and causes them to climb to the top of a plant stem, where the fungus can then grow and spread through the colony. This behavior is thought to increase the chances of the fungus spores being dispersed by wind and rain, allowing it to infect other ants. The fungus also causes the infected ant to bite onto the stem, securing itself in place and providing an ideal location for the fungus to grow and produce spores. If you want to see some creepy imagery, Google the mutant ant fungus, and you can see what the ant looks like after it's been infected, and then this fungus manipulates its behavior, actually gets into its brain, and manipulates its behavior to create an overwhelming desire to get up to the highest point and bite down and just stay there and die and become food for the fungus to then grow out of and spread its spores that way. There are several types of fungus that do this. There's one that specializes in houseflies and does pretty much the same thing. There's one that actually will make ants climb up and stick their abdomen, their rear end up in the air, which then turns red as an effect of the fungus. Looks like a delicious berry, and birds come along and eat that, and then they spread it around when they fly around and drop the seeds or the spores. One in particular is very specialized. It only infects cicadas between the ages of 13 and 17 when they come out for their periodic emergence. And it doesn't just control them. It grows inside right between the abdomen and the thorax and then causes the abdomen to fall off. At this point, the cicada is effectively dead because they can't survive without an abdomen. But in that hole where the abdomen was, there are all these little spores just sitting there. And the fungus, still in control of the cicada, causes it to jerk around and jump around and almost do a little dance and shake the spores loose. And they spread that way. Let's see. Has anyone heard of toxoplasmosis? Yeah, toxoplasmosis is, I think it's been jokingly called the old cat lady disease. It's a fungus, toxoplasma fungus, and its main purpose is to infect the brains of rodents. And what it does is it inhibits their fear of cats, rodents and other small mammals. Basically makes them a little impulsive, makes them have no fear of cats. They'll run right up to a cat and the cat can eat them. And then the fungus goes through the digestive system of the cat and gets spread around elsewhere. And you humans can catch it too from a dirty litter box, or if you stumble upon some cat droppings out in the wild, you can catch it too. It doesn't make us quite that bad. I think there's some exaggeration as far as the effects of it go on humans. The joke is that if you really love cats, it's because at some point you caught toxoplasmosis, and it's just forcing you to always want to be around them. But it does, it lowers your inhibitions, and it can make you more impulsive, and that's about it. But you're not going to run up to a giant predator. If you have toxoplasmosis and you're like on safari or something, you're not going to run up to the lions and try to pet them. And they probably, unless they were really hungry, they wouldn't notice you anyway. Lions aren't that interested in people. Plasmodium is the fungus that causes malaria, and it actually affects the mosquitoes, the Anopheles mosquitoes, and changes their behavior before it gets into people. What it does is, Anopheles mosquitoes, like in their natural state, they just kind of want to hang out in the vegetation and not do much until it's time for breeding. Then they'll all go out and get some blood from whatever's nearby. And then they'll just go back to the vegetation and they'll do their thing. But Plasmodium causes these mosquitoes to be more active and leave their shady vegetative spots and actually go out and seek out lots of large mammals, but notably humans, and infect them with the same bacteria. I'm sorry, the same fungus, and that's how malaria gets spread. Now, the exact mechanisms by which these fungi manipulate the behavior in animals is not fully understood. We know that they do it. We don't know exactly how, and it's still an interesting topic to think about, I think. Are there any other questions right now? Any at-home viewers with questions? All right. That was actually all I had. I got through that whole thing, and I thought that was going to take a whole hour, and it took about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that. So I'm happy to stay up here for the next half hour in case anyone thinks of anything. Or if you came in late, if you want to ask a question I may have already covered, that's fine too. I can talk about that. Otherwise, I can tell you more about the band I was in when I was a teenager. You know what I should do is actually say why I'm at the Doctor Who convention. Why am I at Console Room? Yeah, because I told you I've written some sci-fi books. I did a lot of arts and music reviews. But back in like 1981 or 1982, right around there, when I was just a little teeny tiny baby Rob Callahan, I turned on Channel 2 one day after school and saw this really weird thing on called the Sontaran Experiment, where there was it was far in the distant future. One Sontaran was there, like torturing Earthlings to see what they could stand, to see how well they'd stand up to an invasion, and it hooked me. And then, like 2 days later, it was over, and a different story started. It was, I think it was Genesis of the Daleks was the next one. And I didn't actually pay much attention to the Daleks, but Davros creeped me out. He creeped me TF out. And so if I hadn't been 100% hooked by then, I was hooked. And I was, they talk about with the old classic Who, the kids would watch it sometimes from behind the sofa. Well, there I had my behind the sofa episodes. Pyramids of Mars, those mummies and Sutek were terrifying, but I couldn't stop watching. Brain of Morbius, a lot of those Robert Holmes stories where they had, like, there was both a monster and a separate villain. Those were great. And we saw that too in the Seeds of Doom, the episode with the Krynoids that we started on. The villain was basically an upper-class twit who had lots and lots of money and was obsessed with plants. So even though everyone knew if this Krynoid gets to infect someone and start to spread, the entire planet is doomed, this guy didn't care. He felt that was just the way it should be. And he was so obsessive that he called out some animal rights activists for wanting to protect the whales and all these other animals, but not doing a thing about bonsai, which is tree torture. Oddly enough, like when the Krynoid did get established and was going around murdering people, he was the only one who didn't try to kill. He did end up dying. He got turned into compost, which I think that particular character would have enjoyed, fitting end for him. That was after he tried to compost Sarah Jane and the Doctor. This guy's a real weirdo. But he was like the main villain, and the Krynoid was the monster, the secondary threat. We mentioned the Vashta. There was a plant in the Sarah Jane Adventures. The Slovene brought it to Earth, and it was going to infect the whole atmosphere and poison everyone. I forget what it was called, though. Does anyone remember? The rackweed, yes. So there are plants and fungi that can give off spores they'll kill you, but none that are powerful enough to poison the whole atmosphere for us right now. If anything, the plants are working overtime trying to suck out the poison we put into the atmosphere in this world. But a good example is black mold. You get black mold spores, you might not even know anything's wrong for years and years and years, and suddenly you've got this potentially deadly lung infection. A lot of berries, we think of blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, cranberries, strawberries, all these delicious berries. There are plenty of berries out there that are toxic. You eat one and you'll die. And some of them are really invasive. I got to pull those out of my yard every year because there's a particular berry, the name is escaping me right now, but it's not poisonous to birds. It's poisonous to like everything else in the world, but birds can eat it without a problem. So they come into my yard because I've got really good soil ecology, and they're in there eating the beetles and the earthworms and everything else. And then they're dropping these berry seeds in their poop. And then these plants grow in, and I got to notice them and cut them down right away before any of the kids get to them, or before even somebody walking their dog, the dog might come up and eat it. So there's a lot to watch out for. I guess what I'm saying, like, you probably already know this about mushrooms and fungi. Don't eat it unless you really know what you're doing. Well, same goes for berries. If you see a delicious-looking berry, if you don't know what it is, stay away from it. Similarities to the mushrooms that look similar but are deadly, yes. An old acquaintance of mine is a mushroom forager. And every now and then, just to taunt people, he'll go on his social media and he'll post a picture of himself frying up some mushrooms, and he'll say, I have no idea what these are, but I found them in the woods. I'm going to try them. And he does it, I think, just to get all of the alarmed reactions of people saying, please don't stop, what are you doing? But he does actually know what he's doing before he puts them in the frying pan. I don't know that much about edible mushrooms. I know you can buy a kit to grow them, like you can buy a box that hangs and they grow out of it if you keep it in the dark. And I do have a cellar where I do some growing. It's very damp and humid and dark down there, so I've grown plenty of mushrooms accidentally over the years. But I don't eat something that just appeared. If you want psychedelic mushrooms, you need horse poop to get them going. Interestingly, I heard an interview with some medical professionals a few weeks back on the radio while I was driving around. saying that there are experiments now ongoing with psilocybin or psilocybin, the thing in mushrooms that makes you trip, as a sort of cognitive reboot for people who have like chronic depression or PTSD or something like that, something that is just like a debilitating mental state, and that in some patients there's been a very positive response with basically having them trip on mushrooms. And obviously the source of the depression or the source of the PTSD doesn't go away, but your brain, your intellect, and your emotional state sort of reboot and are able to deal with it without like feeling like it's still there affecting you now, you know? So that's something that would be interesting to watch, and it certainly falls under the category of what we're talking about, although not as harmful plants that act like animals or harmful plants that interact with us, but as beneficial plants. And there are plenty of benefits to plants we don't even know about, or that the scientific community doesn't know about. So I don't want this to become political, but I will say that the overturning of Roe v. Wade reminded me of an old Ho-Chunk technique for inducing miscarriages from way back in the day, which was the bark of a certain tree. And I won't say which tree that is because I don't know if I would fall under some kind of legal liability at that point, people going out and making tea from this bark and drinking it and making themselves sick. And its practical use was to alleviate cramping during menstruation. But if you basically overdosed someone on it, you could induce a miscarriage, and it was basically abortion tea. So that's something that could be harmful or beneficial depending on what you need from it. And there's a lot of plants and a lot of medicinal plants out there like that. My sister is actually, she's a certified nurse, and she also does a lot of work with medicinal plants too. And the thing about all these medicinal, I don't touch them. I am all about the plants that can be used as fibers and building materials and fabrics, and all about the plants you can eat. But with the medicinal plants, you get the dosage wrong, you could kill someone, so I don't even go near them. I don't use them for that stuff. But I know a few things about them. All right, that ate up another 10 minutes. That was awesome. We only got about 20 minutes left, I can see by the clock back there. Any other questions or comments? All right. Nope, no questions or comments. So let's see, what else can we talk about? I actually didn't know that I would have access to a screen, so I was apologizing to them when I got here. I was like, if I'd known that, I would have brought a bunch of visual aids. But apparently, like, the screen is like, it's testy and it's giving them a hard time, so they're glad I didn't bring a bunch of visual aids. But if I get to come back and do something like this again, I will definitely bring all kinds of stuff we can look at and be grossed out by and be fascinated by. It'll be awesome. What else could we say about plants? Oh, you've got the mic on in the back. Is there someone online asking a question or making a comment?
I don't see anyone. I also think it's okay if we need to end early, we can.
We can, unless anyone really wants to stay. We can actually end the panel and just, if you've got nowhere else to go, we can sit and chat for the next 20 minutes until they get set up for Sophie Aldred. So thanks for coming out. Again, I'm Rob. At 7:30 tonight, we have a DIY hydroponics workshop, building your own hydroponics planter from found items. And you have to sign up for that in advance. There's only 24 spots because I only have so many found items I can give out to people. But then there's another one tomorrow. So if you don't make the one tonight, you can sign up for tomorrow. Should be a lot of fun. We're doing on, I think, tomorrow or Sunday, another presentation called The Gardens of Mars. What sort of plants could grow on Mars if you were on Mars trying to grow a garden? We'll look at the Waters of Mars episode and their greenhouse. We'll look at the movie The Martian and how he's growing potatoes, and And we'll talk about that. What could grow there naturally, what could grow there in a greenhouse in a controlled environment, and how you'd make it happen. And there's a video, I'm going to play that between now and the panel, just so I get some experience with it. There's a video game where you can try to grow food on Mars. All right. Thanks again. It is the 10th anniversary of Console Room. I am so happy to be an invited participant here, and I'm going to see a lot of old friends and a lot of new faces too. This is great. And again, it's Tom Baker's birthday today. How awesome is that? Tom Baker's still kicking it. All right. Thanks again. 89 years old. All right. Everyone have a wonderful convention. I will see you all soon. Thanks.